Okay, so I'm looking here at an op-ed piece from USA Today from about a year ago from Marc, CEO of Finseca, and it explains the Trump savings accounts, right? And I have Mr. Cadin on hold, and I need to be talked to like an infant on this, and I'm going to play a healthy skeptic here. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Help me understand how this is not wealth redistribution.
Well, look, I think the Trump accounts are the most significant savings vehicle created in a generation. And I think we have to start from the premise that most of the country is not invested in the stock market. They don't have a connectivity to capitalism, and we've seen it in the elections in New York and other places where socialism is on the rise. And so part of that is because we don't have the connectivity with enough Americans into the capital markets and into the stock market. So while there is a small upfront investment from the federal government of $1,000 for every child born of American citizen into these Trump accounts, that's not really where the action is. The action is in all these other forces that are coming together in creating massive amounts of savings that are going to give every American citizen access to the capital markets in ways that have never happened before.
But still, we have to admit there's a bit of wealth redistribution there.
There is clearly an upfront investment from the Treasury Department. That's undeniable. But that's not really where the action is. I mean, I think if we were going to look at wealth redistribution across the federal government, I mean, this costs $20 billion. And we spend trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars in a whole bunch of different programs. And why do we do that? We do that because we want to create a safety net. We're a compassionate, generous people. But the real key is how can we get the momentum going forward so more Americans, it's 40% of the country, have no connectivity to the stock market. And the stock market's up 13 to 15% every year for the last 10 years that included multiple presidential elections, inflation, COVID. So again, if we were going to strip out any and all areas where there's some element of wealth redistribution, this would be at the very, very, very end of the list in terms of cost and in terms of upside benefit that actually rallies this country, every single one of them, around this notion of being invested in capital markets and being invested in capitalism, which is a good thing for everybody.
Well, I mean, capitalism and wealth redistribution are two different things. I'm asking this because here's my fear. I look at things 10 miles down the road. How would a President AOC work with this? I mean, I know that I don't understand the expiration date of 2029 unless that's just at the cap of the Trump presidency. But we've already had the likes of Teresa Ghilarducci and researchers at the New School for Social Research here in New York City issuing papers about, Social Security 2.0 and nationalizing the 401k and IRA system. Should there be any fear that a future Democrat president with a Democrat Congress can mess up what the intent of this was?
Of course, there's always what's the risk of the next election? What's the risk of kind of socialism on the rise? And while I agree that, capitalism and wealth redistribution are different things, they have a similar origin story in that I think you and I both violently agree with this notion that capitalism has lifted more people out of poverty than any government program. But the reason why there is a disenfranchisement with many Gen Z, younger people in the notion of capitalism is because they're not experiencing it. So this gets to the root cause, let's get people connected into the stock market. And yes, you can always take a good idea and make it bad. We can't afford the government, as you know, that we have. We're running $2 trillion deficits. Social Security goes insolvent in 2032. So the reality is what do we do about that? And I think the Trump accounts are a brilliant first step in giving everybody some exposure to capitalism and the equity markets without costing an arm and a leg, the way so many of our federal programs do.
Do we worry again that the intent of this program I understand, but it's still in the hands of government, and government changes hands, and those hands might be Democratic socialists?
Well, and yes, of course, that is a worry. But the thing is, so like, what's the alternative? Do we do nothing and to create no connectivity? Do we just hope that that people will suddenly wake up and say, "Oh, it's a good idea to get 13, 15% return on my money every year for 10 years, despite all the trauma," right? So, like, I think that's part of the beauty of this. It is a pilot program. It's generated literally hundreds of billions of dollars of outside investment from super generous billionaires who have said, you know what, we're gonna invest in this. States are looking at how do they create incentives for businesses to invest. So it's really, in my mind, for pennies on the dollar, we're giving these accounts, we're creating a framework and a structure, and we're generating massive amounts of private savings to flow into these accounts to the benefit of all these kids. And at the same time, we're exposing a whole bunch of people to the equity markets, which ultimately is the answer. We need more private sector solutions. So again, like, there's always a risk where good things can be turned bad, but I think this is a heck of a good place to start.
Do we have any fears? I could think of myself at 18 years old unlocking 50% of some kind of savings account started in my name when I was born. I'm not saying that all 18-year-olds would do something irresponsible with it, but I would say there would definitely be a portion that would.
Yeah, well, and count me as one of those 18-year-olds who absolutely would have been irresponsible, 100%. But look, that's why, like Fonseca, we represent financial planners. That's why we're so excited about this, because we know that we need to get more Americans saving early, saving in the right ways. But you get 2/3 of the country that don't have a financial plan. They have no roadmap for their financial future. We need to change that. We need to create incentives for people to get access to a financial plan and a financial planner. But money without a financial plan is destined to fail. And like, there's virtually no 18-year-olds. I have an 18-year-old. I would not want them to be empowered to make decisions on this, even though they will based on the law. But we've got to educate people so they take advantage of not just the return on the markets, but compound interest, save money, save it early, save it in the right ways. So this is a start, but it's got to be coupled with a more robust discussion around financial planning.
What about, do you fear at all in the future Democrats saying, great, we're not going to invest in an index fund, we're going to invest in green energy or low-income housing construction or some other left-wing priority that this was never started to promote?
Yeah, I mean, I think if I'm honest, I'm concerned about government intervention from both the right and the left, and so we've got to be mindful of that. And we got to let the free markets go. That's where I do think the Trump administration has done a masterful job of having these codifying around low risk, high yield investments. You know, ETFs, if you say, like, they're relatively low risk equities that don't have a huge cost associated with them. But that's where, again, advocacy matters, citizen engagement matters, the education you do on this program matters. We just can't let a good thing turn bad, regardless of what the next, political identity is in the White House or in Congress. So we've got to be vigilant as a people, and I know nobody believes that more than you.
Do we worry about an inflationary effect? I mean, if you have 5 years worth of kids who may be inheriting, in a way, if that's the right word, I've read it could be upwards of $250,000. Do we think colleges and universities aren't going to respond to that and go, now we could raise tuition?
Well, I think the bigger issue, because again, this isn't meant as a college savings plan. This is meant for a long-term savings vehicle that should be used in retirement. I think the bigger issues around college tuition are more around it's sort of like healthcare. Like, what is subsidized, right? What is subsidized will grow in cost 100% of the time. So I think there are bigger levers that are going to drive inflation of college tuition or healthcare expenses or other things. And those things have to be addressed because we can't afford the government we currently have. This is individually owned savings that is being seeded by the government and then employers and other philanthropists are adding to it. So I see, again, zero downside to the
Well,
Trump
look,
account.
let me jump in here. I love the idea of the private sector doing this. I love the idea of Dell Computers, and I've seen the list of businesses. That part of it, I absolutely love. We're talking about retirement now. I mean, are any of us going to be alive when these people turn 65? I mean, you're talking about babies being born now. A lot of us are not going to be here to see how this works 65 years from now.
Well, I have it on good authority. All of the AI people are working hard to make sure you are live and doing this program 65 years from now. So I have that on good authority from my sources. So you better keep doing the work because we need you.
Okay, well, look, I'm by the way, what does it mean, index fund? I mean, again, I'm a little bit of a skeptic and a little bit of an infant. What does it mean to have this put into an index fund?
So look, if you think about how the stock market is organized, it's got a bunch of different companies that all are on publicly traded. They all have their own prices. What an index fund effectively does, it's sort of like the S&P index. It basically takes all of those really effective companies and aggregates them. So when you pull them all together, then you get the benefit of diversification in one index fund, which is basically the aggregate of a bunch of different company stocks. And so you minimize the downside risk. If you're just going to pick one stock, if you picked NVIDIA a few years ago, you'd be doing great. If you picked Blockbuster a couple of decades ago, you wouldn't like how that turns out, right? So an index fund basically, it normalizes the risk across a bunch of different companies. So that way people don't have to be afraid, am I picking the right company? Am I picking the right stock? Because none of us know with any degree of precision what the future is. So you get the benefit of what we know in the aggregate. The stock market moves up. It has down periods, but again, over the last 10 years, it's gone up on an annualized rate every year by 13 to 15%. So an index fund gives you the benefit of that aggregate upside without having to individually pick winners and losers in terms of stocks.
Lieutenant Dan got me invested in a fruit company, right?
But then you'd be doing really well.
Yeah, if you were invested in Apple in the early 80s. Okay, so just to wrap this up, is the 2029 cap simply for the end of the Trump administration? Would it have to be reauthorized under the next administration?
It will have to be reauthorized. So this is a pilot program that's done for a period of time. Some of that's, like when they passed the law, they didn't have all these big commitments from Dell, Mr. Dell and everybody else. So this was an experiment to increase access to the markets for every American child born of a U.S. citizen. But then they want to see how it worked. Right now, it's just getting started, and the report card is out. It's an A++++. So I fully expect this will get continued by the next administration and the Congress after next. But again, that's where citizen engagement matters so much.
All right, I got to leave it there. Hope you were okay with my skepticism. That's part of what I do here. I have to do the interview that way on things like this, just so because people say, well, you're some kind of cult, just whatever the president does and says. Oh, a healthy dose of skepticism is how we met these things out.
It's the basis of what makes this country great. Great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
All right, Marc Cadin, CEO of Finseca. That is an explanation of the Trump accounts.